Okay, good afternoon. So we're going to look at this before we started experiencing some issues, but I hope now it will be okay. For example, we are going to look at changes. Changes, effects of changes, effects of changes, effects of changes, effects of changes of consumer income, on equilibrium. So let's say we start with that curve. We start with the first budget line, with Y or quantity of Y. This is with X. So let's call this ZQ. We start from there, ZQ, and then let's say we have this indifference curve here, like that. So this is U2. So this first equilibrium point, we can call it D. If that is the consumer's income, that will be the equilibrium point, where the budget line ZQ touches the indifference curve U2. Suppose the income of the consumer reduces. If the income of the consumer reduces, the budget line will shift to the left, like that, parallel to that one on the right. So this one will be KW. The income of the consumer has reduced, so it will form a tangent with a lower indifference curve, U1. This will be A. Okay. If the income of the consumer increases, the budget line will shift further to the right, like that, touches another budget line. I mean, touches another indifference curve, U3, and we call that C. All right, so we call that J. Now, theory has it that this budget line, this optimal points will form a straight line. That straight line is called OA. So OA shows what will happen to the equilibrium position if the consumer's income changes. The equilibrium point will always lie on a straight line. That straight line is called the consumer's expansion path. So we'll call that line OA is called the consumer's expansion path. In other words, as long as the income of the consumer changes, the next optimal point, or where the budget line touches the next indifference curve, because they are many, it's a family of indifference curve, they form a straight line. So the examiner can ask you to illustrate that, and this will be the illustration, probably give you 5 marks for it, and probably we also give some explanation. The examiner can ask you to explain what will happen to the consumer's equilibrium when the income of the consumer changes. So changes in the consumer's income will cause a shift in the budget line. So the budget line can shift either to the left if the income falls, or to the right if the income increases. So if the income increases, the consumer is in a position to obtain more of both commodities, both good X and good Y, if the income increases. So in this case, the budget line will shift to the right, remaining parallel to the original one. Okay? So if the consumer's income falls, on the other hand, the budget line will shift to the left, remaining parallel to the original one, so it will shift to KW. Then form a tangent with the lower indifference curve U1 at point A. So assume that the initial budget line of the consumer is ZQ. That's the starting point. The equilibrium is at point B, where the budget line ZQ is tangent to the indifference curve U2. If the consumer's income were to fall, the budget line would shift to the left to KW, where the equilibrium point is A. If the income were to increase, the budget line would shift to the right to JP. No? So it will shift to JP. Where the consumer's equilibrium will be at point C. The curve joining point A, B, and C is called an income consumption curve. The line OA is income consumption curve or ICC. So this is income consumption curve. So income consumption curve or ICC, it shows what will happen to the consumer's demand for both commodities as the income changes. So if the examiner asks you to show diagrammatically what would happen if the consumer's income changes, what will happen to the equilibrium position, then the examiner wants you to illustrate the income consumption curve. The line from joining the points A, B, and C is a straight line. It's called an income consumption curve, ICC. It shows that even if the income of the consumer changes, the next equilibrium point will still be on the same straight line. That straight line is called the income consumption curve. Then we also look at the effects of changes in the commodity price on consumers' equilibrium. So we also look at effects of changes in commodity price. Changes in commodity price on the consumer's income. Sorry, on consumer equilibrium. On consumer equilibrium. Now we look at effect of changes in price. So again, we'll do that diagrammatically. We want to show the effect of changes in price on the consumer equilibrium. So again, this is good Y or QY, quantity of good Y. This is good X or Q of X. Okay. So we have, this is called the budget line, AB. So if you want to analyze the effect of changes, assume that it is the commodity on the horizontal whose price is changing, and you will assume that its price is falling. For example, if the price of commodity X falls, the budget line AB will pivot. It will open to get more quantities of X at the bottom. So it will pivot to the right like that, to another point called AB prime. If the price is allowed to fall even further, it will pivot even further to AB double prime. AB double prime. What will happen? Every time it pivots, it touches or it makes a tangent with a different indifference curve. So every time it pivots, it touches on a different indifference curve like that. So this is AB prime, AB double prime. So here you have your first curve here, or you can call it U1. So you have E1. Then you have another indifference curve, U2, and you call this E2, and another one, we call it U3, and this is E3. Again, if you join those point of equilibrium, you'll get a straight line. Now that's called a PCC. PCC means price consumption curve. So it shows what changes to the equilibrium points when the price, say, when the price of commodity X falls. So when the price, for example, is P1, for example, you consume Y1 units, X1 units. When the price changes, now you have X2, you increase the units of X, and the price falls even further, you have more units of X, X3, and so on. So the graph examiner again asks for a diagrammatic illustration on what changes to the equilibrium point when the price, say, of commodity X falls. Then you have a diagram like that. So suppose that the consumer is consuming two commodities X and Y. The effect on a fall in price of one of the commodities on the consumer's equilibrium is shown below. So you'll assume it's commodity X on the horizontal whose price is falling. So if the price of one commodity, e.g. X, falls, the budget line of the consumer pivots. Pivoting means nothing happens on the horizontal, but it opens like a pair of compasses. It opens on the bottom. The budget line of the consumer pivots to the right from the initial position AB to the new position AB prime. This is due to an increase in the purchasing power. The consumer is able to save in real time, in real terms, and use his savings to buy more of commodity X whose price is falling. So the consumer is now in a position to buy more of the commodity given the money income. The new budget line, AB prime, is tangent to a higher indifference curve U2. The new equilibrium will now occur on the right, showing that as the price of commodity X falls, more of the commodity. As the price of commodity X falls, more of the commodity will be bought. If the price of commodity X is allowed to fall further, the budget line will pivot further to the right, to AB double prime, forming a new equilibrium at the point of tangency with a high indifference curve, U3. This one. Pivot further to the right, and forming a high indifference curve, U3, with an indifference curve, U3. If we join the points of tangency of the successive budget lines with high indifference curve, a price consumption curve, PCC, is formed. This one. You join E1 and E2 and E3 to get PCC. It shows what will happen to the consumer's demand for both commodities as the price of commodity X falls, one of the commodities. At the equilibrium point E1, the consumer buys OX1 units of X when the price is P1. At E2, the consumer buys more, now buys OX2, and so on. So that is the indifference curve approach or the ordinalist approach. So any question before we move into applications? Now I want to apply this approach. Where can it be applied? But before we apply it, do we have any questions? Very well. The first application of the indifference curve approach is to distinguish between income and substitution effects. So let's see how that happens. We distinguish between income and substitution effects. So you'll have to look at this very carefully as we distinguish here, because that is what you will be doing in an exam situation. So first application, so we are looking at application. Application of indifference type. Application of the indifference type. What's the first application? Number one, to distinguish. To distinguish between income and substitution effects. And substitution effects. Distinguish between the income and substitution effects. So let's distinguish. So again, we have good Y and we have good X. QX. Want to distinguish between income and substitution effect. The first thing we put here is the budget line. So let's say we have a budget line. Then you assume as before that the price of commodity X is falling. So the budget line pivots to the right to get more quantities of commodity X. So it pivots like that. AB prime. Then I'll introduce the first indifference curve. So the first indifference curve will come that. It touches. So this is indifference curve 1. It touches the budget line to produce the first equilibrium point there. You call it E1. So that equilibrium point you consume Y1 and X1. So first, I want to introduce the substitution effect. So substitution effect means this: as the price of commodity X is falling, assume that there's something that happens. There's a compensating variation. Compensating variation. So assume there is a compensating variation in income. For example, a compensating variation could be the price of commodity X has reduced, but at the same time, the government has introduced a tax on income so that whatever gains the consumer would have obtained because the price of commodity X has fallen has been taken away. So the government gives with one hand, takes away with one hand. On one hand, the price of X has reduced. On another hand, there's a tax on income which has taken away whatever gain they got out of reduction in the price of X, so that the consumer remains at the same level of utility. Now, to show that, I'll introduce another budget line. A budget line of compensating variation, I will call it budget line CB. To show that the fall in price of commodity X has been compensated, I will introduce another budget line. In a PJ, it touches the same indifference curve, but from below them. So I'll call this CB. Touches at this other point, I call this point E2. So what's the interpretation of this? The interpretation is this. The price of X has reduced. Because the price of X has reduced, the consumer has reacted by buying more of X, from X1 to X2, to a new equilibrium E2. The new equilibrium is shown by the point of tangency between the line of compensating variation, this budget line CD, touches the same curve U1, but at a lower point, we call that point E2. The movement from the first equilibrium point E1 to E2 is what we call the substitution effect. Substitution effect. Essentially, what the consumer has done, he has substituted more units of X, okay, and less of Y. Reduced Y and increased X because the price of X is increasing, is reducing, but the consumer's level of welfare has remained the same because the government took away his income through tax. So he has remained on the same level as before. The same level is U1. There's no U2. So movement from E1 to E2 is called the substitution effect. How about the income effect? So in the income effect, you must assume that now the consumer is able to move to a higher level. So introduce a higher indifference curve. Let me introduce a higher indifference curve. So introduce another curve here. Another curve that touches. This is U1, U2. So touch. So that's U2 touches that, like that. So this curve is U2. So the equilibrium at U2 is at that point, E3. So at E3, you buy more units of X, X3, Y3. So movement from E2 to E3 is what we call the income effect. If you add the income effect plus the substitution effect, you get the total price effect. So ideally, when the price of X falls, there are two effects. We have income effect and you have substitution effect. The two of them gives you what we call the total price effect. But then, to show only the substitution effect, you have to assume that the fall in price of X was compensated. So to show that it was compensated, so that the consumer remained at the same level of satisfaction or utility, we introduce another line, CD. So that CD will touch the same indifference curve, but at a lower point. That lower point will show substitution because you're moving now from buying, from an equilibrium point E1 to equilibrium point E2, and that is called the substitution effect. So to show substitution, you must introduce another budget line of compensating variation to show that the consumer remained on the same level. He did not change, even though the price of X reduced, something must have happened to compensate for that variation in income so that the consumer did not rise to another level. He remained on the same level of U1. Then, to introduce the income level, you must assume that the consumer was able to make his position better off by moving from level U1 to another higher level of satisfaction, U2, so that out of savings from the reduction in price of commodity X, the consumer uses the increase in his real income to increase consumption of X from X2 to X3, and he also increases Y from Y2 to Y3, and so on. So equilibrium E2 to E3 is the income effect. E1 to E2 is the substitution effect. Substitution effect plus income effect gives you the total price effect. So that's how we distinguish the income and substitution effects. So to distinguish the income, to distinguish between the income and substitution effect, we are looking at page 7. So a fall in the price of commodity X results in an increase in the quantity demanded of the same commodity. The quantity demanded of that commodity will increase. This is called the total price effect. The total price effect may be split into two separate effects, i.e., the income effect and the substitution effect. As the price of commodity Y rises, it becomes relatively cheaper to buy commodity X, and thus the consumer is induced to substitute more of X for Y. This is called the substitution effect. At the same time, the fall in the price of commodity X will make the consumer better off, i.e., he experiences an increase in his real income. This may induce the consumer to buy more of commodity X, or more of commodity Y, or more of both commodities. This is called the income effect. So consider the diagram, yeah? First, to eliminate the income effect, you assume that accompanying the fall in the price of commodity X, there is a compensating variation. So when the price of X is falling, something compensates, some compensating variation, so that the consumer remains on the same level. You introduce that by bringing in a new budget line called CD. So first, eliminate the income effect by assuming that accompanying the fall in the price of commodity X, there is a compensating variation of income that leaves the consumer at the same level of utility as before the price change, i.e. U1. The original budget line is AB, while the budget line after the price of commodity X has fallen is AB prime. To make the compensating variation in income, you shift the budget line AB to the left, keeping it parallel to AB prime until it is tangent, or it touches the same indifference curve, the original indifference curve U1. This is the budget line CB. The movement from E1 to E2 is the substitution effect. This is where the consumer is not better off, but has substituted X1, X2 units of X for Y1, Y2 units of Y because of the change in the relative prices. The movement from E2 to E3 is the income effect, and where the consumer buys X2, X3 units of X and Y2, Y3 units of Y because of the increase in his real income. So that's how we distinguish between the income and the substitution effect. This is the application of the indifference curve approach. Application number 2 says, application number 2, to distinguish between inferior and Giffen goods. Now, for each of them, we'll have a different indifference curve, a different diagram. For example, if you want to show an inferior good, you have its own illustration. If you want to show a Giffen good, you have its own illustration. Now, the substitution effects for all of the goods are the same. What distinguishes inferior and Giffen goods is the income effect. So the substitution effect will be positive for all of them. But for Giffen and inferior goods, the income effect is negative. So how do you show the negative income effect? So let's illustrate here. So this first one will show an inferior good. So I want to show inferior good here. So this will be for the inferior good. I want to do them at the same time to show you where the difference comes, because they are the same. I will just show you where the difference is coming. So this is good y, and this is good x. That's for an inferior good. Then I'll draw another one here for different good, so that you can see where the difference is coming. That will not be visible. I'll just move the camera, there's no problem. Hello. Ni ile shida tu tulikuwa nayo, but we managed to solve it. Ilirudi kastability. So let me start by showing indifference curves of an indifference of an inferior good. So the budget line is where you start from, and it is the same there. The same AB. It will be the same for any other good. That's the starting point. Then the price of X is falling, the same for all of them. The price of X is falling, so it pivots to the right. It will pivot to the right. That AB prime. The indifference curve I'll introduce will be the same for all of them, like that. Comes down. This is U1. This is the first equilibrium point, E1. It will be the same for all of them. Y1, X1. The substitution effect will be the same in every diagram. So if X price is falling, you'll consume more of X. So how do I bring in the substitution? I introduce budget line CB of compensating variation. So introduce CB to compensate the line of compensating variation. It touches that budget line. So you have CD touches the same indifference curve at the second point E2. So that you have more of X, X2. This is Y1, Y2. So E1 to E2 is substitution effect. Substitution effect is the same for all of them. Now, I want to show you this one, the one we drew first. This one was for a normal good. Normal good. What is the difference? The difference is in the income effect. The income effect is E2 to E3. Now look, for the income effect, more of X is being consumed. So you move from X1 to X2. X1 to X2 is substitution. X2 to X3 is the income effect. You still increase the consumption of, you simply increase the units of good X. So X must be a normal good. As its price is falling, you're increasing the units from X1 to X2, X2 to X3 is normal good. You know, for an inferior good, instead of X3 increasing, it will come in between. So this one, I will just figure out where to put my U2. I'll decide I want to put it in the middle so that X3 is in the middle here. X3. So now I say inaenda backwards even. X3. So nitachora my difference curve, iguze X3 hapo. So hii ndio U2. Now, I want you to notice the difference in inferior good. The difference is this. For an inferior good, as the price of the good is reducing, you don't buy more of that good. You buy less from the savings. So X2, you move backwards to X3 in the middle, so that the substitution effect is positive. X1 to X2 is positive, but the income effect is negative. But the total price effect is still positive. Why? Because the substitution effect is bigger than the negative income effect. So the total price effect is still positive. More of the inferior good is bought. Then now we bring in the given good there. Given good. Again, good Y, good X. You just notice me doing the same thing. Budget line, the same. AB, the same. The price of good X is falling, so it shifts to the right. The same. AB prime. Indifference curve U1, the same. So it comes, touches that curve, comes below here, U1. The first point here is the first equilibrium point, the same. Y1, X1. I want to introduce substitution effect. I introduce the line CB of compensating variation. It touches the budget line from below there. So CB. That's how you create E2. So X2. So substitution effect is positive, E1 to E2. That's the substitution effect. What brings the difference is the income effect. But for a given good, the negative income effect will be bigger than the substitution effect. So substitution effect is X1 to X2. The negative income effect will come all the way like this. This will be X3. So we put X3 there. Make X3 happen so that indifference curve U2 inaguza X3, E3 pale juu. Hii ndio U2. Na hii equilibrium point hapa juu ndio E3. So the negative income effect is bigger than the positive substitution effect. Substitution inaenda mbele, so it's positive, but the income effect is bigger, is negative. So the total price effect for a given good is negative. In other words, when the commodity is a given good, you will not buy more of that commodity when the price reduces. In fact, you buy more of Y. So Y iko hapa juu, unanunua Y3. You buy more of Y than X. X3 ni kidogo. So commodity X, the one on the horizontal, is a given good. So again, starting from the first one, a normal good. Substitution effect is the same for all of them. Substitution effect means you'll have more of X being bought from X1 to X2, E1 to E2, because its price has reduced. The income effect, use the savings to jump to another level, U2. So when you jump to another level, you buy more of the commodities from X2 to X3, then commodity X is a normal good. When it comes to an inferior good, substitution effect is the same, X1 to X2. But the income effect, you make sure, is negative. So it comes in the middle, negative. It moves backwards. But the negative income effect is smaller than the positive substitution effect. So total price effect, if you add the two, negative income effect plus positive substitution effect, the total is still positive. So for an inferior good, more will be bought. How about for a given good? Substitution effect is still positive, X1 to X2. But the income effect comes to the extreme. Extreme inakuja hapa mwisho. So the negative income effect is bigger than the substitution effect. So total price effect for a given good is negative. So I'm reading on page 7 to distinguish between inferior and given good. So an inferior good is one for which an increase in the consumer's real income leads to a fall in the demand of the good. That's an inferior good. A given good is a very inferior, is a more inferior good with an upward sloping demand curve. So the substitution effect always acts in such a way that when the relative price of a commodity falls, more of that good is purchased. The income effect can, however, act either way. It can be positive for a normal good, or negative for an inferior good, or a bigger negative for a given good. If more is bought, the good is said to be a normal good. If you buy more of X when its price is falling, you say it's a normal good. So to illustrate an inferior good, consider the diagram. So the movement from E2 to E3 is the income effect, which in this case is negative in respect of commodity X. However, the negative income effect is not greater than the positive substitution effect. Hence, the total price effect is positive. So while the negative income effect is greater than the substitution effect, then the commodity is said to be a given good. In this case, the overall price effect of a fall in the price of commodity X is a fall in the consumption of the commodity. So for a given good, what this shows is if the price of X falls, then the total effect of that will be a fall in its consumption. Actually, you'll buy more of the other commodity because this good is given. So that's distinction between a normal, inferior, and given good. So do we have any question? Any question on that? Any question on that distinction? Okay, then you look at application number 3. You can use indifference curves to derive a normal and an abnormal demand curve. What has been derived there is a normal demand curve. You can derive a normal demand curve using the price consumption curve, PCC, where the budget line was pivoting to the right, and it touches the next higher indifference curve. Then you join the points E1, E2, and E3 and drop them below as construction hidden lines to form the demand curve DD below. So the indifference curve, indifference curves can be used in the derivation of normal and abnormal curve as shown. Then 4, indifference curve analysis can be used to derive an Angel's curve. So don't forget, an Angel's curve is simply an income consumption curve. It shows the demand of a particular good, say good X, as the income of a consumer is increasing. So if the demand for commodity X is increasing, as the income of the consumer is also increasing, then that's a normal good. But for an inferior good, as your income is increasing, at some point, the demand will fall off. So that kind of curve is called an Angel's curve. So indifference curve analysis can be used in deriving Angel's curve with the income consumption curve. So you look at the income of the consumer on the vertical, and then the units of a commodity, say commodity X on the horizontal, then you plot as the income is increasing from one level to another, what happens to the demand of the commodity. So that will tell you whether the commodity is normal good, an inferior good, or a given good. So the Angel's curve illustrates the amount of a commodity that a consumer will purchase per unit of time at various levels of income, holding the consumer prices constant. An Angel's curve is illustrated below. So income is on the vertical axis, demand for commodity X is on the horizontal. So like commodity X there is a normal good. So the shape of the consumer's Angel curve will depend on the nature of the commodity and on the consumer's tastes and preferences. For a normal good, like the one shown for commodity X, for a normal good, the Angel curve will slope upwards from the left to the right, like the curve you can see there. It's an Angel curve. However, for an inferior good, it will, after some point, begin to slope downwards from the left to the right. Then number 5 application, indifference curve analysis can be used to examine the different welfare effects of government policies such as taxes and subsidies in chapter 4. We said you can also use the consumer surplus to analyze the welfare effects, say, of consumption of a particular commodity, see what society is benefiting out of consumption of a given commodity, given the prices, taxes, subsidies, and whatever. You can use indifference curve analysis for the same thing as was achieved using the producer surplus. So here, the government can be able to distinguish whether taxes would be better or subsidies would be better as a policy of the government to try and improve the welfare of citizens. Would it be better to reduce taxes, or would it be to give subsidy to the consumer, subsidize maybe consumption of milk, subsidize consumption of bread, like the government paying part of the prices, the way the government is subsidizing diesel. So I think they're paying 20 shillings per liter subsidy so that the price remains low. So the government can use indifference curves to analyze what's the better for the welfare of Kenyans. Would it be to subsidize the cost, or would it be better if we reduce the rates of taxes on commodities? E.g., to examine the comparative welfare effects of either imposing a direct tax or indirect tax, or whether to provide subsidies are a better measure than direct cash payments in welfare terms. So you can use indifference curves to compare. Would it be better to reduce taxes, or give subsidies, or give cash? Give direct cash payments, like to the elderly, I say social safety network, social safety net. Would it be better to give people money, those who are disabled, or just reduce taxes or goods, or give subsidies? Which is a better policy measure for our government? Now you can analyze that using indifference curve analysis. Finally, 6, indifference curve analysis can be used in international economics to evaluate the welfare effects of free trade or imposition of tariffs. Tariffs are taxes, customs duties. So that's the end of our chapter 7. If there's any question, you can ask. Nani ako na swali before we introduce chapter 8. In the meantime, I can check kama tunaweza pata swali nzuri ya past paper to illustrate these things. Yes, you can check page 40. Page 40 is sitting on. Which sitting is this? The pilot paper. Ya inakaa kama November 2015. Hiyo ni page 40, angalia question 5. Page 40, I think, is November 2015. Check question 5. November 2015, question 5 is on page 40. If you're on page 40, you'll find November 2015, question 5. That's on page 40. It says, using the indifference curve. Using the indifference curve margins, discuss how the consumer's equilibrium is obtained. Use an appropriate diagram to illustrate your answer. That should be very simple for you guys, and it is 6 marks. They want us to illustrate the consumer equilibrium and the indifference curve approach. So what you do, you want to illustrate consumer equilibrium. Under the indifference curve approach. So you have the Y and X. So you have indifference curves here. And the indifference curve here, and the indifference curve here, a family of indifference curves. You could even have another one there. And you can even call this I1, indifference curve 1, indifference curve 2, indifference curve 3. And if you want equilibrium, you introduce the budget line. So I'll introduce the budget line to touch the highest possible indifference curve. Let's say it touches that one. This is the budget line AB. It touches that point. I call that E. And I call this Y1. So the consumer is at equilibrium where the budget line AB touches the highest indifference curve, in this case I2 or U2. Okay, So at that point, the consumer is in equilibrium by consuming Y1 units of good Y, X1 units of good X, where the budget line touches the highest indifference curve. So that budget line AB touches the indifference curve I2, forming an equilibrium point E1. Y1 units are consumed of Y and X1 units of Y. So that's part A. And of course, you have to explain that for 6 marks. So there will be marks for the diagram and marks for the explanation. Then B, with the help of a well-illustrated diagram, draw the substitution effect and income effect, first of a normal good, second of an inferior good. So B, they want the substitution effect and the income effect. So we'll start with a normal good. Normal good. We want the substitution and income effects. So now that Y and X. That's good X. Where do you start? Start with the budget line, AB. Then assume the price of good X is falling. So the price of good X is falling. So you buy more of X. The budget line pivots to the right to AB prime. Then you draw your indifference curve like that. It goes down. So this is U1. This is equilibrium point E1. Then you introduce CD, the line of compensating variation, touches the same budget line below there. So this is CD. This second point here, E2, will give us the substitution effect. More X is being consumed, so this is X2. So E1 to E2 is substitution effect. Then you want to introduce your income effect. Income effect. So you introduce a new indifference curve, a high indifference curve. Make sure it touches the outside line. So this is E3. You make sure it touches the outside. So this is U2. So E3, you'll have more units of X, X3, and Y3 units. So E2 to E3 is the income effect. Both the income effect and substitution effects are positive. So substitution effect, you increase from X1 to X2. Income effect increases X further to X3. You know? So this is a normal good. So like we said, substitution effect is the same for all of them. What makes the difference is the income effect. Now, they want the substitution and income effect of an inferior good. So let me show you an inferior good. I'll put it right next to this one so that you can see the difference. So I'll put it right next here. I'll call this inferior good. right next year. Okay, I put next. I want to distinguish between normal and inferior. But the budget line, the same. We start from there. Budget line, AB, the same, like this one. The price of X is falling, the same. You shift the budget line to the left. You pivot to the right, like that. So you pivot to the right, B prime. Then you introduce your first indifference curve like that. And this is E1. The same as before. This is the same for all of them. Then I introduce CB, the same for all of them. It touches the same indifference curve. At this point, call that E2. And that is the X2. You use substitution effect. The same. The substitution effects are the same. X1 to X2, X1 to X2, E1 to E2 is substitution effect. The difference now would be in the income effect. Instead of moving X3 ahead, it will come in the middle. It will come in the middle there. X3, it has moved backwards. The income effect has moved backward, so that I'll have my indifference curve there. This is U2, and this is E3. And this is Y3. So the difference is in the income effect. But you notice for an inferior good, the substitution effect is bigger than the income effect, which is negative. So the total price effect is positive. So that answers that question. Part C is something different. So now, I want to introduce chapter 8. I think I sent up to chapter 8, but you can confirm if you have chapter 8. Please confirm that you have chapter 8 in your WhatsApp group. Chapter 8 is called markets. So let me also confirm that I have a copy of chapter 8. So do you confirm that you have chapter 8? So that next time we'll send you up to probably chapter 11 now. We'll send up to chapter 11. Micro will end at chapter 9. So the next chapter we're doing is the last chapter in micro, then we start macroeconomics. So now I want to introduce markets, chapter 8. So what's a market? A market is simply the means. We only have chapter 7. One of you give me your number so that I can forward to you. I can forward chapter 8. Mtu anipatie number, ni forward kwa mtu mmoja, then you share in the group. So that's Ibrahim. Let me just write your number. Let me just save it here. Then I will share. Oh yeah, the equator number here. I can send to Ibrahim or to Njenga, whoever. So I've shared 3 chapters, so Ibrahim can forward them to the group, chapter 8, 9, and 10. So in chapter 8, we are looking at markets. So a market is the means by which buyers and sellers they carry out their transactions. So just a means. So it means a market could be a physical place, like Wakulima Market, or it could be on the phone. So it's simply a means. So even the phone can be a means of transacting, where the buyer and seller transact. The buyer can declare his intentions. Like now we have online businesses. The market is online. And incidentally, the biggest market called market for foreign currency is traded online, where volumes of transactions are carried out, every day over the internet, where they sell currencies, they sell gold, dollars, euros, and so on. And so some of the biggest markets are not even physical. So a market is simply a means by which buyers and sellers carry out their transactions. So the term market refers to the means by which buyers and sellers carry out their transactions. It could be a physical place, a market like you go there physically and do shopping, or an arrangement by which buyers and sellers communicate. So it can be an arrangement by which they communicate the intentions. Thus, a market may be created over a phone or even over the internet. Markets can be classified depending on the nature and the extent of competition. So we will have a theoretical market. It doesn't exist in reality. It's called perfect competition. So we'll be looking at the features, but that kind of market does not exist. But we have a perfectly competitive market structure. Then most markets are imperfect. And the imperfect competition will have monopoly, will have duopoly. Monopoly means one. There's only one seller of goods, and the goods don't have, say, substitutes. They don't have substitutes. They are the only ones sold. Then you have duopoly, where you have two firms dominating. You have only two firms within the market or within an industry. Then you have oligopoly. An oligopoly is a cartel, a group of a few firms that dominates a market. Then you have monopolistic competition. So this is a unique market that has features of both competition and monopoly. The two are there. So it's a more realistic market. It's more realistic where you have a group of firms, but each firm fights hard to create its own brand using advertising and salesmanship. Look at the FM stations. There are very many, but each FM station will make an effort to distinguish themselves. Like one will come and tell you, we are classic FM, and they develop a market for themselves for old music, classic music. And they distinguish themselves in that way, so that if you're told classic, in your mind, you already can see a different station altogether. They are able to distinguish themselves in the eyes of the consumer, so that the consumer can see there's a difference between classic, Kiss FM, but they're all radio stations, So what distinguishes them is packaging, packaging and marketing and salesmanship. So we'll be looking at that kind of market structure called monopolistic competition. Then there is monopsony, where you only have one buyer or one buyer of a particular type of labor, for example. It's called monopsony. So before we look at each specific market structures, maybe we need to define some revenue concepts. So the revenue of a firm is the money, income, that is earned from the sales of its products and services. The firm's revenue can be classified. You could have total revenue. So to get total revenue, you simply multiply the quantity that has been sold by the price per unit. Then you can have average revenue, which is total revenue. You divide by the quantity to get the average per unit. Then marginal revenue will be change in total revenue over change in quantity. So total revenue. The total revenue is the total income received by a firm from selling a given quantity. Selling a given quantity of a product in the market. Total revenue is determined by multiplying the price per unit of the product by the quantity sold over a given period of time. So total revenue is price times quantity, P times Q. How about average revenue? This is the total revenue per unit sold. So you take total unit, total revenue divided by Q, number of units sold. In a perfectly competitive market where prices are constant at all output, so that's the assumption. In a perfect market structure, that price does not change. Price is fixed by the market in perfect competition. And the main feature is that you have a large number of buyers and a large number of sellers, so that none of them can influence the price, so that the price remains constant and fixed by the market. So in a perfectly competitive market structure where prices are constant at all output levels, the average revenue curve will be the same as the price. In other words, average revenue is total revenue per Q, and we know total revenue is P times Q. When you cancel Q and Q, average revenue becomes the same as price. How about marginal revenue? This refers to a change in the total revenue arising from the sale of one additional unit, an additional unit of output. Symbolically, it can be written as, so marginal revenue is change in TR, total revenue, over change in Q. So we want to look at our first market structure. It's called perfect competition. Now, perfect competition has a number of assumptions. So we start with those. The examiner can ask you, can you explain 4 assumptions or 5 assumptions in perfect competition? So the model of perfect competition is based on the following conditions. Condition number 1, a large number of buyers and sellers. Now, this is important because with this, the seller and the buyer cannot influence the price. The price is purely fixed by the market. None of them has a significant influence to change the price. So the market includes a large number of buyers and sellers, so that each individual firm, however large, only supplies part of the total quantity offered in the market. The buyers are also numerous, they're many, so that no monopolistic power can affect the working of the market. Under this condition, no individual firm or no buyer can affect the market price by changing their output or sold or bought. So even if it's the consumer that decides to buy less of the commodity, it cannot affect the price because there are many other buyers. If it's the firm that is trying to manipulate the price by bringing in less, it cannot change because there are many other sellers. The second assumption, the second condition is called product homogeneity. This is important. Product homogeneity means that the products in this market are the same, both in technical terms And in usage, there's no difference. In other words, if I'm given the product of farm A and farm B, they are indistinguishable. There's no difference between them. So that you cannot set a higher price claiming that my product is better. That's why we said this is a theoretical model. It does not exist in reality, because where on earth would you find this kind of conditions? So product homogeneity, the industry is defined as a group of firms producing homogeneous products. This means that both the technical characteristics and the services associated with the product sale and delivery are identical. There is no way in which a buyer can differentiate between the products of the different firms. You cannot distinguish them. Another thing about product homogeneity means that because your products are the same, and because there are many buyers and there are many sellers, the first condition, then both buyers and sellers are called price takers. They are price takers. They have no say. They cannot influence the price charged in the market because they are many and the products are the same. The products are homogeneous, so both of them are price takers. So the above two assumptions imply that individual firms in perfect competition are price takers. The demand curve facing an individual firm is infinitely elastic. The demand curve facing an individual firm is infinitely elastic like that. Infinitely elastic. This is the demand curve facing an individual firm. The demand curve is infinitely elastic. What that means, firms under perfect competition will supply any amount, any quantity, as long as the price is P. They cannot influence the price. The price will be fixed by the market. Then they will take that. They are price takers. So the demand curve facing an individual firm is infinitely elastic, indicating the firm can sell any amount, any quantity of the output at the prevailing market price. The demand curve of the individual firm is also the same as the average revenue and the marginal revenue. So this demand curve is also the same as the average revenue, is also the same as marginal revenue, is also the same as the demand. Look at the schedule we have there. Column 1 is quantity demanded from 1 unit to 8. Column 2 is price. You can see the price is fixed at 20. The price does not change. It's constant under perfect competition. Total revenue, you multiply column 1 by column 2. The price times quantity gives you total revenue. So total revenue will be increasing each time by 20 by its own price. 20, 40, 60, 80. Every time it increases by a constant amount, 20, 20, 20, up to 160. Average revenue is the same. We said average revenue is total revenue divided by Q. So it will also be 20, 20, 20, constant. Marginal revenue, the same. So you can see in the next page, you have your demand curve. So the above table shows that as the quantity demanded increases by the same amount, you increase the quantity demanded by 1 unit up to 8, the price remains unchanged, 20. This implies that each additional unit sold increases total revenue by an amount equal to the price. So total revenue every time increases by 20. So the above information can be plotted in a graph. So that graph, price and output, Then there is condition number 3. To support the large number of buyers and the large number of sellers, condition number 3 says there's freedom of entry and exit from the industry. There are no barriers. Nobody is stopping you from entering. So there's free entry and exit of firms, i.e. there are no barriers to entry or exit from the industry. The entry and exit from the industry may take time, but firms have the freedom of movement in and out of the industry. The market price is determined by the price and cannot be by the market and cannot be influenced by any individual firm. The industry demand curve, unlike the individual demand curve, slopes downwards, because if all the firms within the industry reduce their price, they'll be able to sell more. Should the market price rise or fall, then the new price will apply to every firm within the industry. The relationship between the individual firm's price and the market or the industry price is shown below. So for the market, the demand curve is downward sloping. So downward sloping, DD. But once the market has fixed a price, that's the same price that will be charged by every firm. Then, condition number 6, profit maximization. We'll assume that every firm has only one goal, to maximize profit. So the goal of the firm is to maximize profits, and there's no other goal pursued. There's no other goal. 5, there is no government regulation. So we'll assume that the government does not interfere with the market. The market is left on its own. So there's no government intervention in form of imposition of taxes or even subsidies. 6, perfect mobility of factors of production. So the factors of production are free, they are mobile to move. Factors of production are labor, capital, entrepreneurship, free to move from one farm to the other for the economy. So labor can move from farm A to B. Capital can be invested in any other farm. So there's free mobility, perfect mobility of factors of production. Finally, perfect knowledge. It is assumed that all consumers, buyers and sellers, know everything. They have all the information they need about the farm. They know all the goods that are being sold. They know all the prices. So hakuna kugonga mtu. That information is perfectly known in the market. Perfect knowledge. So it is assumed that all buyers and sellers have the full knowledge of the conditions of the market. So I think that's a good point to stop. So in the next class, we're going to look at optimum level of output of a farm under perfect competition. So any question? Any question? Then we stop there. We only have 1 minute. Let's stop there. So we'll pick it from there. We'll be looking at the optimum level of output in our next class.